Have you ever watched a word land so cleanly that the person it hit didn't move for 3 full seconds? You're about to. 9 words. That was all it took. 9 words spoken without elevation, without theater, without so much as a shift in posture. And Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history, a woman who had stood at that podium and fielded questions from 100 hostile journalists without once losing the thread, went completely still. The clip ran 22 seconds. By 11 p.m., it had been viewed 6 million times. By morning, it had a name. People weren't calling it a comeback or a clapback or a moment. They were calling it a close. Because that's what it was. Not a volley returned, a door shut. By the time most people woke up the following morning, 3 cable networks had already restructured their morning blocks around it. Producers who had been tracking the Crockett-Leavitt dynamic since December, since Leavitt had stood at the White House briefing podium and told reporters that Jasmine Crockett was, in her words, wholly unqualified for the office she was seeking, recognized immediately that something had shifted. The tone of the coverage was different, not louder, more careful. Anchors weren't characterizing it, they were replaying it, specifically, repeatedly, at full length, without commentary, letting the 9 seconds before the 9 words do the work. To understand what those 9 words meant, you have to go back to where this began. The briefing room. December. Karoline Leavitt at the podium. Composed, direct, precise in the way she is always precise. Fielding a question about Congresswoman Crockett's entry into the Texas Senate race. Leavitt had answered without hesitation. The president's feelings on Crockett, she said, were quite clear. And then the phrase that would become the load-bearing wall of everything that followed. She believed the president considered Crockett wholly unqualified for the office she was seeking. The word wholly was not an accident. It was an architectural choice, not unqualified, which carries ambiguity, which invites debate. Wholly, complete, structural, foundational. No room in the framing for partial credit, context, or reconsideration. The word moved through political media the way certain words move. Slowly at first, then all at once. It was quoted, repeated, challenged, and defended. Crockett's allies pointed out her background. A trial lawyer, a criminal defense attorney, someone who had stood in courtrooms arguing on behalf of people the system was designed to discard before she ever ran for Congress. Her detractors cited inexperience, positioning, and ambition outpacing record. The debate ran for weeks. Both sides thought they were winning. Then came the panel. The studio was a mid-sized cable format. 2 chairs, a low table, and a moderator seated at the outer edge of the frame. The kind of setup that's been used for political conversations since before either of these women was born. The lights were slightly cooler than usual that afternoon. A grip who worked the show later said they'd swapped the key source after a complaint from a guest the previous week and hadn't adjusted back. It made everything look a little sharper, a little more exposed. The production assistant who had been pulling pre-interview research for 6 days running said she knew by Wednesday that whatever was going to happen in that room would not be routine. She didn't know what she knew. She just knew. Leavitt walked the length of the corridor to the studio the way she walks every corridor, with her shoulders back and her pace measured and her eyes forward. Not hurried, not performing easily. Actually easy. She had done this hundreds of times. She would do it hundreds more. She had the name. She had the platform. She had the backing of an administration that had, for months, been framing Jasmine Crockett as the opposition's loudest voice and least credible one. The scaffolding was built. The positioning was set. She sat down, acknowledged the moderator, adjusted her microphone, and crossed her legs. She was ready. Crockett arrived 30 seconds later. She wore something simple. She shook hands with the moderator without using both hands, the way people do when they're not performing warmth but actually feeling it. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at Leavitt once. Not a stare, not a sizing up, just a single look, brief and flat. The kind that says, "I see you and I've already finished deciding," and then looked at the moderator. The first 8 minutes were standard. Issue framing, policy positions. Both women are operating within their own lane with practiced fluency. You could feel the rhythm of it, the way a familiar song feels before the bridge arrives. Leavitt twice used the phrase, "the American people deserve to know." She said it the same way both times. The same cadence, the same pause after no, the same micro-nod that follows a line she believes closes an argument. The audience responded the way audiences respond to confidence. They leaned in slightly. They accepted the framing. Crockett answered without engaging Leavitt's framing directly. She answered the questions underneath the questions, the ones the framing was designed to prevent from being asked. You could feel the gap opening between what was being said and what was actually being communicated. And it was in that gap, that specific, silent, growing gap, that the moment was already being assembled. Then the moderator asked about qualifications. It was not a neutral question. It was built directly on Leavitt's December briefing language. The moderator used the word holy. She asked Crockett to respond to the characterization that she was, as Leavitt had said at the White House podium, wholly unqualified for the office she was seeking. It was designed to put Crockett in a defensive posture, forced to argue against a framing she hadn't chosen, in language she hadn't set, on terrain that had already been salted. Leavitt turned toward Crockett, not dramatically, just turned. Crockett looked at the moderator for 1 second. Then she looked at Leavitt, and then she did something that nobody in the room or watching at home fully processed in real time. She didn't reach for her credentials. She didn't cite her law degree, her trial record, her years in criminal defense, or her congressional tenure. She didn't construct a counter-argument to the word holy. She bypassed the entire structure of the question. She looked at Leavitt, directly, quietly, without expression, and she said 9 words. "Tell me, what office have you actually held?" The room didn't gasp. That's what's important to understand about what happened next. Gasps are reflexive. What happened in that room was not a reflex. A woman in the second row pressed her lips together slowly, as if preventing something from escaping. The moderator's eyebrows moved, not upward in surprise, but inward, the way a face moves when it is suddenly engaged in a calculation it didn't expect to be running. A camera operator on the left side of the set adjusted her frame, pulling slightly wider, instinctively, the way you pull wider when you sense the image is about to change. Leavitt's chest rose once, visibly. Her eyes moved, left, then back to center, in the fraction of a second that a person's eyes move when they are locating an answer and finding the shelf empty. Her jaw set. Her hands, which had been loose in her lap, closed. She opened her mouth. She had been in rooms like this her entire career. She had answered harder questions than this in front of larger rooms than this, with higher stakes than this, and had never once lost the thread. But the question was not hard. That was the specific, devastating thing about it. It was the simplest possible question. It asked for a list, a factual list, offices held before the current one, and Karoline Leavitt, who had become the youngest White House press secretary in American history at 27, who had worked on campaigns and in media and in the communications infrastructure of the Trump political operation, had held exactly no elected office. The scaffolding, the word Crockett had not used but which the structure of the question had exposed completely, was visible now. The entire qualification argument, wholly, foundationally unqualified, had been built on the position of someone who had herself never run for office, never appeared on a ballot, never been held accountable by a constituency. The 9 words hadn't refuted the attack. They had simply turned the light around. Leavitt answered. She said that her role was different, that press secretaries don't hold elected office, that her qualifications lay in her service to the administration. Her voice was controlled, her diction was precise, but something in the cadence had changed. The pace between words slightly longer than usual, the way a person's speech changes when they are constructing the sentence as they deliver it, rather than retrieving a sentence they have already prepared. Crockett did not respond. She didn't need to. The moderator moved on. The panel continued for another 11 minutes, but the 11 minutes that followed were, in a specific and measurable way, quieter than the 11 that came before. Not quieter in volume, quieter in the room's relationship to what was being said. A floor director standing in the back said later that it felt like a building after something structural had shifted. Everything still standing, but nobody quite trusted the floor the same way. Backstage, after the taping wrapped, one of the segment producers found herself standing with her clipboard in both hands, not looking at it, just holding it. She said she was trying to remember the last time she'd watched an entire argument get disassembled by a question that contained no accusation, no evidence, no rhetorical move, just a request for a fact. She couldn't remember. Leavitt left through the corridor she had entered. Her pace was the same. Her posture was the same. But a production assistant who had been working in the studio for 2 years described something in the quality of the walk. Not different in form, but different in weight. Like watching the same architecture carry a different load. The clip moved before midnight. Not the whole panel, just the 9 seconds. A fraction of a second before the 9 words, and a full 3 seconds after them. The 3 seconds after were the story. Leavitt's face in those 3 seconds, controlled, still, located somewhere between composure and the effort required to maintain composure, said the thing the 9 words had only implied. It confirmed, without confessing, that the question had landed exactly where it was aimed. By 6 a.m., it had been segmented into 11 independent clips, each one spreading through a different platform at a different speed. Political accounts ran it without commentary. Comedy accounts ran it with one-word captions. News aggregators embedded it in pieces about Crockett's Senate run, Leavitt's briefing history, and the broader question of what qualifications actually mean in a political landscape where appointment and election have been treated as interchangeable currencies for a generation. The response from the White House came by afternoon. It was longer than the 9 words, considerably longer. It described Leavitt's record of service, her role in the administration, and the president's confidence in her work. The statement was professional and correct, but every time it was posted online, someone posted it beside the 9-second clip. The juxtaposition required no annotation. A 400-word defense of a position dismantled by 9 words reads differently than a 400-word statement usually does. It reads like scaffolding that has been left standing after the structure it was built to support has already come down. The forums ran the question backward. They pulled Leavitt's full record, campaign communications, media work, White House appointments, and mapped it against Crockett's. Law degree, criminal defense bar, 2 terms in Congress, 1 Senate bid. They weren't making a political argument. They were answering Crockett's question with documentation. The 2 lists sat side by side in dozens of threads. Neither one was commented on extensively. They didn't need to be. People who had never followed either woman were watching the clip and asking the same thing. Why had nobody asked that question before? It was available. It had always been available. It was a factual question with a factual answer. And the fact that it had gone unasked for months, through every round of the qualification debate, through every press briefing and panel and op-ed that had used Leavitt's framing without questioning Leavitt's standing to offer it, said something about how arguments work when one side has the podium and the other side is positioned as the subject rather than the interlocutor. Crockett had changed the geometry of the room, not by presenting evidence, not by constructing a counter-narrative, by asking the one question that the official framing had been built, consciously or not, to prevent from being asked. 9 words. Tell me, what office have you actually held? The people who subscribe to this channel don't come for drama. They come for the moments nobody else is willing to show. The moments when a single question, asked calmly, in public, with cameras rolling, reveals the scaffolding that everyone was pretending wasn't there. Join them, subscribe, turn on notifications. The next truth is already on the table.